The oldest Polynesian canoe that we have is from 600 years ago. They went to Hawaii. We don't have any boats from that. We don't have any ships. We know what ships they were using. We don't have them. Our oldest one is 600 years ago. The Native Americans, the Algonquians, they decided it's time for war. The English came in, burned down this fort, killed everyone inside, women, children, and the men. At least more than 9,000 years ago, because Kennewick Man has this haplogroup, it implies that there was a northwestern migration from Europe into the Americas. That's 60 to 40,000 years ago that they were traveling. No boats. You don't need the boats. The maritime archaeologists don't believe we need the boats. The Kelp Highway hypothesis, it is a theory of coastal migration during the Pleistocene. Flint Dibble is saying at the same time that he's citing a theory of Pleistocene seafaring, that Pleistocene seafaring does not exist. You know, I was basically screaming at my camera, live reacting to this Flint Dibble episode, and it took me a few weeks to realize, oh, no one else is gonna fact check this. The idea that they have a monopoly on deciding what our past is wrong, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. My name's Samuel Urban. I go by Illegitimate Scholar online. My path was originally I went to school to be a secondary school, high school, middle school social studies teacher. And I did that after the Marine Corps. And I decided while I was getting my master's at the University of Connecticut that I did not want to do it traditionally. I didn't want to have it decided for me really what I was teaching. And I didn't, I just didn't vibe well with the people I was around, the adults as well. The kids were great, but the adults, not that they're not fine people, just not for me. I like hanging out with guys like you and Dan Richards and like that rather than, my type of people. So while I was in school, I love learning. So while I was getting my degree on the GI Bill, I just kept doing more classes through the summer and winter. And I got, my program was the education. So that was the education degree. But then I also got a history degree and an anthropology degree on top of that, including a archaeological field school on a Paleo-Indian site, multiple sites. And, the field school includes labs and things like that. But I did the field school in Connecticut, southern New England. Some of it is in like Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And I also volunteered for a little bit with the Connecticut State, the Office of the State Archaeologist. The guy I worked with, late Brian Jones, unfortunately, he passed away from pancreatic cancer at a young age. So, respect to him. He was a really good man. Obviously, Dr. Jones, and I respected him enough to never make an Indiana Jones joke about it. So he hated that, of course. I quit my master's and I started the podcast, and I talk about history, anthropology mostly, maritime archaeology, which is what I have some experience with from my coursework. And I mostly work within the traditional sources. I mostly work within scholarly sources, but I am open to and interested in alternative ideas. And recently, at least like the last year, I've become kind of opposed to almost, it's not the way that I would put it, but it's the way that certain other people would put it, opposed to not the mainstream ideas, but the people in the mainstream. And I like to use the traditional scholarly sources in my work, but to, support my own not mainstream views and being open to other ideas. And I'd say that's a long form view of who I am, I guess.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. So what are where are you active on social media?
Right. Yeah. So mostly on YouTube and X, Twitter, Illegitimate Scholar on YouTube, and _scholar on X. And I do a lot of writing on there as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think we probably connected, or I started to become aware of you around the time you had Graham Hancock on your podcast, because we both were fortunate enough to have him come on and do a couple of smaller podcasts last fall. And So that was pretty cool. I saw you interviewed him, and then saw some of the stuff that you did on Flint Dibble. And so I'm sure his name might come up once or twice on our conversation today.
Unfortunately, yeah, he will.
Yeah. And then some of your other work. I mean, you did a video on one of my podcasts with Danny Hillman, who is the Gunung Padang guy, and
yes.
I can't pronounce that, but
yes, I can't either.
But but that was a fantastic kind of an analysis of the podcast that we did together. So I thought, hey man, let's get together and talk. I was super appreciative of that. And your work seems fascinating, and you're very passionate about what you do, and certainly on the cultural anthropology side. But then the maritime archaeology stuff isn't really something that I've dug into yet on the show. So
it's something most people haven't dug into. It's a very, very niche field. I was just fortunate enough to go to the University of Connecticut where we have it, and I studied under one of the world's best. Not that there are many, but one of the world's best maritime archaeologists, Krum Bachvarov, who was one of the archaeologists that excavated the Kitten shipwreck off the coast of Bulgaria in the Black Sea. So I took a few classes in that, studied it, and actually forgot to tell you, but with Krum Bachvarov, I did a independent study where I recreated a 16th century Algonquian canoe, dugout canoe, 12 foot. I built it to the specifications out of an eastern pine log that they had, using some traditional methods, burning and in ads, they would have used stone tools, but I don't have the arm strength or the durability to do that.
All right, cool. Well, I mean, what are you thinking, and where would you like to kind of kick things off?
I want to give you this that I've been holding for a while as a jumping off point. And it's obviously a small gift. It's almost a token, but it's cast iron pig.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's cool. Do
you have any idea where this is going?
Actually, I have no idea where this is going. Idea. Yeah. Okay. A green cast iron pig.
Yeah. It's and that is a cast iron pig that I bought off of Etsy. Okay. And no worries if you don't hold on to that. Do whatever you want with it.
Okay.
But the reason that I'm giving that to you is because of how leadership functions on New Guinea and what that tells us about culture in general, and how leadership functions in different places. So one of the big things about culture in cultural anthropology, it's very broad. There's, subfields even within cultural anthropology, being one of the four main subfields of anthropology. Sometimes socioculture, sometimes social and cultural are split up. But that pig is representative of big men on New Guinea. And what you'll see at these different stages of development, and this is kind of an older cultural anthropology idea. It's not used as much anymore, but it still is, just because it's pretty broad. But in our culture, in our society, our leadership, people are elected, right? People are chosen for different positions. We have different organizations of social constructions like companies and in different types of companies, right? LLCs, S corporations, private, public, all these different things. And those are like official positions. And we have hereditary positions, like especially in the past, like monarchs, kings, they're hereditary. But there's often, if you go back far enough, there aren't really these hereditary positions. These older stages of development in cultural anthropology, band, which is kind of an extended family group. There's a band of a few dozen people, maybe anywhere from a dozen to a few dozen. You have the tribe, which is like 150. I forget what the name for that is, and around 150. It can go up and down. Once you go above tribe, you get into chiefdoms, chiefs, and those sometimes and often are hereditary positions. And then after that, you're at the state level, which is what we have today. And there are certain markers for what makes something a state, a chiefdom, and how it's decided what the leadership is informed by the culture that we have and our interaction with the environment. That's largely what culture is. And I know I'm going all over the place, but it's tough. So when we're talking about culture, there's many definitions for it from people like Emil Durkheim and a dozen other anthropologists that I can't recall the names of. But culture is learned, shared, it's dynamic, which means that it changes. It's ever changing. It's always changing. It changes with the new interactions. And it is the innovations that we create to interact with our environment, both physical and human environments. So that pig, getting back to the pig, on New Guinea, the island, especially in the highlands where they are pig farmers, pastoralists, they're very often at the band and the tribe level before you get to the chiefdom level. The leadership is unofficial. So it's unofficial leadership. And you see this in other places as well, like the Algonquins, the Eastern Algonquins that I studied. In the Northeast, they had sachems. These are unofficial leaders. And, just another digression, but this is important. This unofficial leadership, when you have an interaction with a different group of people that doesn't share that type of leadership and they don't understand it, that creates conflict. So, for example, in 17th century New England, when you have English settlers coming in, they come in and they have their official leaders. They have the people that are elected. They have the heads of the companies that formed certain colonies. At the time, they were organized as companies. Those are official leaders, and they did not understand the sachems of the Algonquins, what their leadership was like, because they expected, we have a problem with this Native American, this Algonquin guy, who's your sachem, in the same way that the English, if they had a problem with another Englishman, would say, like, who's the leader of your colony? Like, we'll work this out. But the sachem leadership doesn't work like that. They lead by other people wanting to be led, willing to be led by those people. And they change. The sachems change, and they can also be contextual. For example, a guy named King Philip. King Philip or Metacom, different names. He was an Algonquin who was seen as very, very...
A Native American named King Philip?
Well, they would take on English names.
Okay.
So I think that this was a name he chose himself, but it might have been given by the English. But at many times and in different places, people will adopt different names in different contexts, depending on what the culture is. But in our culture today, a lot of us would view it, yes, that's him. That's Metacom, King Philip. So he was seen as violent. I would say foolhardy, maybe not foolhardy, but he was seen as too, in the 1660s into the 70s, he was seen by others as too volatile. But at a certain point, the Native Americans, the Algonquins, they decided after 40 years of English settlers coming in, settlement, they decided it was time for war with the English colonies of New England. So we have the New England colonies that form into the New England Confederation at that time to fight the Eastern Algonquins, who before this were not a combined force. They were split up into many different tribes throughout New England who would have been at odds with each other. The Pequot, the Narragansett, the Wampanoag. Their main enemies would have been the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee, but they would have fought within themselves. The Narragansett, for example, fought with the English settlers against the Pequot in the Pequot War of 1635. But by the 1670s, with that cultural interaction with the English, they realized they needed to band together. And that's a very hard thing to do, just like Vercingetorix, another example, trying to unite the Celts who have these violent fights within themselves, trying to unite against the Romans. The Eastern Algonquins had to unite against the English, and they did, besides the Pequot, who were on the English side at that point. One of the only groups, the only major group as far as I know. So King Philip then, when they decided we're going to fight this big war against the New England Confederation, which formed, if you want to pull up the New England Confederation flag, it's a flag that I love, being from New England. and my ancestors fought in this war, as well as actually one of my direct ancestors was killed in King Philip's War. This was an annihilation war at this point in the 1670s, and King Philip was chosen. Actually, I'm sorry, that's not the one I'm looking for. It's the pine. Oh, actually, that is the one they would have used there. That flag, but I was thinking of the one with the pine tree in the top left. That one right there. Yeah. This war, by some estimates, was the deadliest war of Americans, or what would become Americans, being the European settlers, by percentage of the population. It killed like 5 to 10% of the New England settlers, a higher percentage of the Algonquins. They were attacking each other's food supplies. They were burning each other out, burning down villages. Just awful, absolutely awful, complete annihilation war. But King Philip was chosen to lead at that point contextually because that was what they needed at the time. Whereas before, a warlike leader was not needed.
And the battles were going on from present day where to present day where?
So because the Pequot, who were in Connecticut, were on the English side, most of the battles did not occur in Connecticut because the Pequot were defending. So almost all of the battles were happening in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Some of them may have happened in what's now Maine, at the time was part of Massachusetts, as well as New Hampshire and Vermont. But mainly Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and a few in Connecticut near the borders to those states.
Okay. And what weapons were each side using?
Great question. Love that. So the Native Americans were using mostly bows with points of flint, obsidian, as well as repurposed copper that have huge stopping power as points on the arrows. They also would have used certain muskets, not rifles at this point, but muskets. But what you see in some of these early 17th century documents, even before King Philip's War and afterwards, is that the English would annotate what was taken when they come back, and certain muskets would be missing, the nicer ones, but the Native Americans would select which ones they took, and they would only select certain ones. Very, very quickly, they learned what was useful to them and what worked within their culture. And that was not only with warfare, but also with anything else. Like they might use a copper pot, or they might use certain metal objects to improve their canoes. And when I talked earlier about how I made a canoe, there are a lot of these finds from New England of these canoes, these dugouts, also called a mashoon in the Algonquin languages, but they very, very quickly, and this is why I tried to find an earlier one, incorporated these metal objects, copper and iron, into the construction of their canoes, and vice versa. The English saw these canoes, and they would buy these canoes from Native Americans, trade for them with guns or pelts, whatever they needed, as well as things like copper. So what you see when two cultures interact is a cultural diffusion, of a sharing of culture, but it's not like the English pick up a bow and arrow like the Algonquins have. They use objects that make sense within their culture. So they would, because of the river, Connecticut, the name of the Connecticut River, Connecticut means Great Tidal River. So Connecticut River means Great Tidal River. That's
Tidal?
Yes, tidal, Tidal, yes. Great Tidal River. So Connecticut River, Great Tidal River. What the English called Irish canoes, because in their culture, that's what they understood the dugouts to be, because they knew of them from Ireland, where similar dugouts were used. They would adopt the use of these because they were very good for river transportation, not for the ocean. At least the dugout canoes from New England were not good for the ocean. The Pacific Northwest natives, they make some very large ones out of redwoods that do go on the ocean, but they're not great for that. They're not stable. They don't have a high water line. So for river transportation, the adoption of the technology, they would adopt the materials to use within their culture. So obsidian, flint points, chert, chert is something you'll find a lot in archaeology, but it's not a material that's often discussed. Actually, I'm sorry, not obsidian. Quartz. I've seen some with quartz. I think those were more ceremonial, but I've found some personally doing archaeology. So this war happens, and the Eastern Algonquins lose at the end. If not, the country would look very different today. I'm sure they would have eventually come back, but they lose, and that's kind of the end of serious resistance in New England.
Any sense for what percentage of the Native Americans were killed, of the Algonquins?
Someone might know. I personally don't. I actually did some studies of in an archaeology class. I did some studies of the deaths in New England, largely frontier towns, largely poor people on the frontiers that made up the bulk of the deaths.
It would be tough to even, who's writing this history? It's the winners that are writing the history. And so would they even know how many there were and how many they killed, I'm sure we have
there we go
estimates, but how accurate are they?
Yeah. So this isn't telling us, this is great. Thank you, Ryan. But this isn't telling us necessarily how many died in the war, but it is telling us a lot about how many people were there. And largely these deaths are from disease. So I'm actually glad that you brought this up. But while a lot would have died in the war, so you see the circa 1600s, 70 to 100,000. One key thing about this, which isn't going to be shown here, is that the population in New England prior to the 1600s, I think people land in 1632 in New England, what's now New England. There already would have been 130 years of decimation of disease, because the English coming in and settling, that wasn't the first people that came from Europe. You had Hernando de Soto in the early 1500s who came into the Mississippi River Valley. And you also had whalers and fishermen who would come in around Newfoundland and the coast of New England for 130 years, and they would spread their diseases, which of course the natives had no resistance to at all. So the population, when the English ended up settling there, why they were able to settle there was because the population was already, I would use the word decimated, but decimated implies originally a 10% death rate. It was much, much higher than that. So what the English settlers come in and they land, they come into a land where some of the writing that they have, that the sun is blotted out by the birds, that the fish in the river are, the fish flow like the water. Like there are so many fish in the river that they flow like water. So the English thought that this was just Garden of Eden. It was everything.
It was.
It was in a sense, but it was also a marker of the Great Death that happened. While the English didn't realize that the Algonquins were affecting their environment, and they weren't affecting their environment to the level of a state-level society like the Mayans, the Inca, or the Aztecs, or even the Mississippi Valley, they were affecting their environment in the way that they would, they had certain ways to catch fish. They would affect the water. They were hunting deer, turkey, fowl, other fowl. They would hunt, and they would selectively burn the forests, and they were affecting their environment quite a lot, just not in ways that the English recognized at the time. And when a lot of the population died, that stopped in a lot of places, and the populations that the Algonquins were eating, that were hunting, they rebounded and just went crazy. So the entire environment is out of whack. So what I can't say, and someone might be able to, what I can't say is how many on the Algonquin alliances, King Philip's alliance, what percentage died there. I can tell you that the Pequot,
it might be in whack for the first time, actually. I mean, you take the people out, the people are creating an artificial environment. If the people are gone, then balance is just restored.
Well, it would have been if the population stayed low and the English hadn't come. But it's like you pull a rubber band, it goes this way, and then you release that tension, it doesn't go right back, it goes past it. So the population, it wasn't in a homeostasis, it was past that, and eventually it would have rebounded back and forth like, you know, a metronome that's slowly going back to center. So it would have been, it would have been out of whack this way because of the humans, the Algonquins, and then it went out of whack in the other direction to an overflowing of these populations, which would have naturally went back and forth until it lands kind of in the center.
In balance, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a good thing you brought up, absolutely. But the Pequot in the 1670s that fought with the English, we do have records of them.
And why were they fighting with the English?
So
survival, I guess.
You have to ask them. But so basically, after the borders of Connecticut, I think basically come from the state of Connecticut. There were colonies there, the Hartford colony, the New Haven colony, that formed into what became the state of Connecticut, colony of Connecticut first. And those were taken in the First War in 1635, King Philip's 1675 or 6 to 78. They defeat the Pequot with the help of the Narragansett. And the Narragansett, some people, it's not a super common beer, but in New England, it's one of our favorite beers. Gansett, we call it Gansett, but it's Narragansett Brewing Company or whatever. They were the most prominent tribe in what's now Rhode Island, and they were the natural enemy of the Pequot. The Pequot had a system of tributaries across Connecticut. Other tribes like the Podunk, which they're from where I live right now. I live literally where Podunk comes from. Podunk, Connecticut. It's not a name of a town, but it's where the word comes from. And so when they lose, they're slaughtered in this palisade fort. And Ryan might be able to pick up a adaptation of this battle. If you look up the Battle of Mystic Fort, you'll see a representation of this palisade wall that the Pequot had created, and there was a village there, and the English went in, they burned the village. It was a battle, but it was more like a slaughter. Of course, they were killing my ancestors fought in this, but I have no. It was a slaughter. It was terrible, absolutely terrible. But they defeat the Pequot. They tell the Pequot, who are split up, that's the one. Thank you. So this on the right here is showing what you'll see there. It almost looks like rounds, like bullet rounds. They are these overlapping palisades with two entrances on each side, and you see the huts on the inside that are burning. You see the English on the inside firing muskets. They have these very distinctive, although small, helmets of the 17th century, firing against Native Americans firing bows. And then outwardly, you see a ring of the English firing. And then outside that ring, those are the Narragansett. So the English came in, burned down this fort, killed everyone inside, women, children, and the men. And anyone who fled, the Narragansett picked off as they were running away. So they
kids, women, whatever.
All of them. Yeah, all of them, indiscriminately. And I just want to make clear, I'm not glorifying this. Not that it seems that way, but yes, this was an awful thing that happened, but it happened. And after that, there had just happened a split between the Pequot into two different groups. Today in Connecticut, in my home county, we have the Mashantucket and the other one, the Pequot. They're two very large casinos. Used to be one of them was the biggest in America or North America. And then a third group split off. They were sent in exile to Ohio, whereas the other Pequot were then forced to no longer use the Pequot name. The treaty after this war was that the Pequot no longer exist. They don't exist anymore. Some of the Pequot, they go to Ohio, they get to keep their name because they're away. What's now Ohio, which was at the time owned by the Connecticut colony. The borders just were considered to go west until the next ocean, which before Lewis and Clark, they don't know about. But the Pequot stay, they're allowed to join other tribes. And then somehow over the next 40 years, the Connecticut colonists, they feel a small twinge of mercy for the people that they destroyed, and they allow them to become a people again, essentially. And when that happens, they essentially are aligned with the Pequot. And then naturally, when this next war happens, the Pequot decide they don't want to fight the people that destroyed their entire culture, or tried to, and then allowed them a little bit back. They decide to fight on the side of the English against their natural enemy, the Narragansett, who I believe Metacome, King Philip was Narragansett, but the Narragansett would have been, if not the most prominent and essentially leaders of the other alliance, they would have been one of the most prominent groups. So because the Narragansett are the most prominent, and because the Pequot don't want that to happen to them, again, I guess they decided to fight with them.
So what was at what was at the core of the fighting? What was the issue? Was land, essentially? Like why were they killing each other? So
there are these smaller issues, like I spoke about earlier. I talked about the little conflicts that they'd have with the Sachem. So you have English. The English come in, their method of subsistence is farming. And so you have these households that are structured in the sense of you have the men leading the household. These are Puritans, highly religious people. And they plant crops, they put up fences, and they grow crops. The Native Americans that are living there, the Algonquians, they're hunter-gatherers and horticulturalists. So they grow small plots of crops, and their women grow these small plots, whereas the men do hunting. And hunter-gatherers, gatherer-hunters, the key thing about them is that hunter-gatherers in general, you need both hunting and gathering. Hunting's not more important. You get crucial nutrients from hunting, but you get the bulk of your calories from the gathering and the amount of horticulture that they're doing, this small stage, not agriculture. That's the next step, or not necessarily step, but that would be the evolution that the English took from horticulture to agriculture. So you have a conflict of these two cultures. And so the English put up fences that blocks the deer that are going through. So you have cows that might get out of the fence. They might trample a field of a horticulturalist field. And then the Native Americans, they're like, you guys, your cow is trampling our crops. What are you going to do about it? And then the English might do something about it. There were situations where they punished their own people for things like that, or transgressions.
Did the English bring the cows over?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. They brought the cows. Okay. There would have been some cows and pigs, maybe not cows, but I definitely pigs released by DeSoto, as well as horses, which would have spread. And they not only spread the horses, they spread the diseases. But yes, the English would have brought the cows in. And sometimes you have the Native Americans killing a cow. Because it's getting in their way, it's trampling their field. So they kill the cow, and then the Native American that does it, the English, they call up that guy Sachem, and they tell the Sachem, you got to do something about this. And the Sachem's like, that's not how it works. I don't have the power that you do. And there's a miscommunication. And there's also, you have a situation where the English, the men are working in the fields, the women are working in the household. And then they see the Algonquins, who their men are hunting, which is a leisure activity for an English person at this time. It's a leisure activity, whereas their women are working the horticulturalist fields and gathering. So the English view these Algonquin men as lazy and making their women do hard work, whereas the Algonquins view the English settlers as the men are womanly because they're doing women's work, farming. Instead of that, it's just another cultural conflict that comes in.
And so there were probably tiny little battles prior to these all-out wars. I mean, there were probably murders that took place on each side of scalping the English, or killing some Native Americans, and those stories would probably infuriate the entire group, and then all of a sudden you've got war.
Yeah, it built up. There weren't even battles. They weren't even skirmishes, really. I mean, these small little, you have these little townships based around a church, and that then multiple of these make up a colony. And then you have these Algonquin villages, which are separate from each other in a lot of ways. Multiple smaller villages of bands would come up to make a tribe, and then there's multiple tribes. In all these little conflicts, they would resolve them when they happened, but eventually more English come in. The Algonquins decide like they're not doing enough. Like some of these issues would be resolved, but eventually I think the Algonquins decided, and King Philip had been saying this for years, like if we don't kill all of them, they're going to destroy us. It's going to happen over time. So they start listening to him and they fight this all out war.
Yeah, and the English are not anywhere near ready to revolt from their home country because they've got this war and this battle going on. But then, But then ultimately, once the Native Americans are less of a threat, then the English are in a position to, revolt from Britain, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is 100 years before the Revolution happens. And even when the American Revolution happens, originally most of them weren't intending on leaving the country. These are people who considered themselves English. They didn't consider themselves colonists. Many of the people would have been born in England at this time. Many of them that would have fought in this war. They were not Americans. They were not colonists. They were colonists, but they were English people, and they viewed themselves as English.
Right, because it's not till 1776, right? And
I think the fighting starts in 75, but the declaration starts in 76.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, much later. And all of that was, I'm glad we got to talk about that. It's one of my favorite things, but all of that was back to the pig. Yeah.
Yep.
This on New Guinea, they have a similar style of leadership as a sachem. They're going to lead other people because other people are willing to follow them. And the way that they inspire leadership is different. And this brings me to another digression. Maybe we'll get back to the pig about an hour and a half in, but you know what a potluck is, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. A potluck, people come in, they bring food, everyone brings a different dish, and you have a party. So the word potluck comes from the word potlatch, which comes from Coast Salish people in the Pacific Northwest. And in a potlatch, it's a redistribution ceremony. So economics is another thing that comes into culture. We have private ownership. Like that's your tablet. This is your office, right? These clothes are mine that I own.
It's all an illusion, though.
It is all an illusion.
Yeah,
it's absolutely all an illusion.
Yeah, none of it's real. And that's what I love about the Native Americans and the Native people is that they didn't have a word for ownership, right? They didn't. There wasn't this. This is mine, and it didn't exist.
Well, one way that I digress from certain other people is that a lot of these people did have private ownership, but they had different ways of thinking about private ownership. And it's different in different places, right? But they didn't have private ownership in the same way that we do. They really didn't consider private ownership of land in the sense that you own it in perpetuity. But if someone comes in and they settle on the land, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you're not putting up permanent houses with like cut timbers. The Coast Salish people actually did. They had planks, but that would take too long of a digression, but they're living in wigwams. They're made of bark across a frame of like not saplings, but larger than saplings that are very bendy, that they make the frame out of. And these are temporary structures that they would live in. They would make new ones. They would move between villages in different seasons for new resources. But that doesn't mean that they don't say this is our land, not in the sense that they would own the land in perpetuity, but it's like, this is the place that we go to and we might let you use it for a little while, but it's still pretty much ours. Not in the same way that there's no deed. But, it's in a state of nature where the person who controls it, and with violence if necessary. Hunter-gatherers are more prepared to leave because they're not going to fight an elimination battle to protect land when they can move 30 miles to the west. It's just not necessary as long as they're not going to come in on anybody else. And there's an abundance of land because the population is so far down. But the potlatch, this redistribution ceremony, because you don't have hereditary positions, elected positions, official positions, people who are willing to follow others, the person who others are willing to be led by is going to be the leader. And in different cultures, that means different things. For the Plains Native Americans, feats of great strength. And in certain contexts, somebody who is maybe more clear-headed might be a leader if you need to, for example, move in exile to Ohio, and you need somebody who's level-headed and can lead you on a 1,000-mile journey to the west. Not 1,000, but 700 miles to the west. Whereas if you're in an elimination battle, you need a King Philip. But with a potlatch, it's for the Coast Salish people, they're going to, in a lot of ways, gain prestige, in a sense, like status with others by holding these giant potlatches, these parties where they're going to redistribute goods, different trade goods, as well as large amounts of fish for them, whatever they eat. And because they're willing to do that, other people are going to be more willing to be led by them. So to the pig. Back to New Guinea. I bring up the potlatch as a more obvious example, but what decides who gets to be the leader is, again, depending on the culture. So on New Guinea, because they're pastoralists who they have pigs, that's like their symbol of wealth, whereas like for a people like the Maasai, it would be cows because they herd cows. So that's their symbol of wealth. But pigs, because they're pastoralists, you would have what they would call a Moka, similar to a potlatch. It's a party of redistribution. And there's a very famous, which almost any anthropology student, I know you have an anthropology student listening to this right now, who's like, Onga's Big Moka. But this guy, Ongka, every anthropology student has seen this documentary from the 1970s. Ongka is a big man on New Guinea. And he's a big, big man. And there's lesser big men under him. So he has a Moka. And when you have a Moka, it's this big feast, basically translated to party. But it really serves a purpose of redistribution and of showing your status. And that has the purpose of, within the culture, at a larger big picture view, it redistributes goods, which reduces conflict. We have conflict in state level societies because of, at certain points, the level of inequality that we have between countries and within countries. That's how you have things like communist revolutions and everything. But this was a system that allowed them to stay stable by redistributing goods, which benefits these unofficial leaders, these sachems, big men, whatever the Maasai call them, I don't know. But when Ongka wants to set up his big Moka, he's going to have this big party of redistribution that shows that within a few villages around, he is the greatest leader, the greatest big man. He has other big men that are basically under him that gain status in an almost feudalistic way, right? In feudalism, you wear your lord's sword, literally. Ryan wears your sword because he's your employee in an official way. Whereas in feudalism, it would be they would be given things by their lord and given tasks, and they're led by them. But for the big man, Ongka helped set up smaller Mokas for these lesser big men who would get status by being legitimized by Ongka. Whereas Ongka gets status by legitimizing multiple of these smaller big men. And they have these smaller Mokas leading up to this one big, huge Moka, where they're going to throw a feast, they're going to give a lot of stuff away, and also in return for Ongka basically legitimizing them, they give a certain portion of their pigs and different items, including cash at this point, because cash is introduced to New Guinea. They're going to give Ongka a portion of their goods, and it all leads up to this big, and Ongka in the documentary is like, big Moka, big Moka. They're going to have this huge, big party. So this is one of Ongka's wives. I think that was one of Ongka's wives. They're polygamous. And in multiple scenes of Ongka's big Moka, Ongka is shown going around to his different wives and kind of like workhorsing them, telling them to, farm the pigs better, basically, which, you know, doesn't look great to us. But he throws this big Moka at the end where he not only gives away hundreds of pigs, if I remember correctly, but like the equivalent of like $10,000 and maybe less, and lots of in a car, I think. But yeah, here we go. You see these big headdresses. These are regalia that they have on. You see him. He's got a military hat on. These items are, to them, to us, we understand them as, you know, symbols of military forces, but to them, they would be interacting with some of these military men, and these would be symbols of spiritual power to them. You might be able to also find an image. It might be a little bit difficult to find, but at certain points in New Guinea, when it was very, very early on, you know, these are not dumb people. They just don't have experience with the items that we have. You might be able to find a picture of someone from New Guinea who is wearing a headdress that has like a coffee tin or a sardine tin in it, because it was an item that fell out of an airplane. And they're like, this is a symbol of spiritual power, because they don't know what a factory is. They don't know what this tin is. They don't know that it was used to be discarded. So this system of redistribution allowed Ongka to eventually show off his status to all these people and be seen as somebody who's willing to lead. So I give you this pig as a symbol that you are a big man. You're a big man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
In stature, in physical size, I think I would go along with that. But
yeah, both.
Yeah. Well,
You would be Ongka. If we were doing the documentary, you'd be Ongka, and I'd be one of the lesser big men, because I'm also a big man.
you are a big man, actually.
But you're a bigger man. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If we stood up, you would see that we are both large men.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Love it. Thank you. That's a really cool story and a really cool gift. Thank you. And I knew basically none of that. So very educational, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
If you want to, you know, you got a free minute. It's less than an hour of a documentary. You might want to watch it.
Yeah, I'll check it out for sure.
It's great. But yeah, I will not be offended if you throw it out, you give it to whatever.
I won't,
you know,
but yeah, I'll keep it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
You keep it wherever you keep it. Look at that and remember, yeah, I'm a big man.
Love it.
I'm the big man.
Love it.
I'm the big man.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's you.
All right. I'll try not to develop a complex, but thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, in terms of like directional, you know, I mean, we could go a bunch of different directions from here. What do you think is a good kind of segue into next?
Well, I probably yapped for long enough that we should probably get into some of the maritime archaeology.
Let's do it. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's you're an expert on that stuff. So
I'd say I'm at least a journeyman,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff that where they had the debate on Rogan with Flint and Graham, you came out pretty soon after that with some facts to kind of combat some of the, or at least show how a lot of what Flint was saying on there was maybe not accurate from your perspective.
Yeah. So there's a number of things on this, and I've given Ryan some of the some images for this. Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is just, it's very, very in depth. You're not going to this stuff isn't Googleable in a regular way. It's not even something that AI could probably do for you very well. These are like, I learned this stuff in niche classes because I happened to go to a maritime college.
Yeah, I feel like, but you know, even maybe before we get into some of those specifics, like I'd love to start with going back in time and like as far back as we know about humans and what humans were doing in the ancient past, and kind of like painting the picture for people of what from a seafaring standpoint, you know, like what were we doing on the water, and how far back in history does it begin?
Yeah. You know, I was basically screaming at my camera, live reacting to this Flint Dibble episode. And it took me a few weeks to realize, oh, no one else is going to fact check this. Like,
right.
Flint Dibble just said crazy stuff. Like at that point, I wasn't really doing standalone videos. I was doing mostly podcasts. I'm starting to do standalones now, but I was watching this, and when I realized, oh my gosh, no one else knows maritime archaeology who makes content. Actually, Krumbuchvarov does have a YouTube channel. I haven't spoken to him in a little while. I should send him a text. I'm not sure. I don't know if he has an issue with me being antagonistic towards Flint. I'm not sure. I should send him a text. I don't think he would, but I'm a little nervous about it. And he's somebody I have a great deal of respect for. Probably the only anthropologist, besides of course Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, who I would be be upset if I knew that I would accept it, but it would upset me to know that I had, tarnished a relationship with him. But at the end of the day, we make choices, and I believe I'm doing the right thing. And I know that Crum knows that Flint is wrong, if he has looked at it at all, because I learned all of this from Crum. And I hope that doesn't mean that Flint will be mad at Crum or something, but not that he could do much. But Dr. Bochvarov of the University of Connecticut, great man, great teacher, great archaeologist. And if you go back far enough, one of these things, like Flint is talking about how if humans were traversing the oceans, we would have evidence. But humans were traversing the ocean, and we don't have evidence. So it's completely wrong in multiple ways.
How far back?
At least 50,000 years.
Yeah.
Well into the Ice Age. Younger Dryas, about 11,600 years BP, basically before now, but really BP means before 1950. It goes back forever. And we know this not because we have the boats, but because of the existence of people on places like Australia and Melanesia, New Guinea, on islands in different locations that cross oceans. Some of these crossings are not that long. We're talking at different points. Ryan, if you could pull up the kind of table that shows, it's a screenshot that I sent him that shows different places of evidence. But this research goes back to the 1980s, going back to 50,000 years ago, as well as older. There's actually evidence of one site at the top there of 800,000 years ago of limited seafaring by Homo erectus. And you see those references, Morwood and Sondar, 1984 and 1998. And all these other examples is evidence.
What is that evidence from 800,000 years ago?
This one, I haven't looked at the specifics of it in a while, but it's the existence of people on that island. Just that people are there at all. This is later. This is actually part of a separate argument, the Austronesian, Polynesian, Melanesian, but different types of evidence here. They know at the last glacial maximum, when the glaciers were spread out, when they were largest, the sea levels are lower.
So like last being what, when?
Ryan, can you confirm when the last glacial maximum was? And
it was like 22,000 years ago.
I think it was a little bit less than that.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but they know pretty well when, like, at different points how high the sea levels were. So then they know how far the stretch of ocean was. They know you were right. Yeah. 26,500 and 19,000. 21,000. You had it exactly. Okay.
Okay.
And they know at different points obviously it's an estimate within some thousands of years, but Ryan, there should be a map of what's now Indonesia. Could you pull that up, please? A lot of different things that I want to show, but over these distances, they know that people are on, I'm sorry, is there a different map of Indonesia? The one that should be more zoomed in on Indonesia, not the whole Pacific? There we go. So right here. These are from the terminal Pleistocene, but it displays what I want to discuss. This is one of the ways that they would know. These show trade routes of obsidian on different islands, and there are two aspects to this. There's the cultural aspect, which is created by humans, learned, innate, rather than our genetic, our divine innate categories. You have the mineral composition of things like obsidian or other materials like stone. That's how they know the altar stone. Recently, this was a big story. The altar stone comes from the Highlands of Scotland to where it is at Stonehenge. Same thing with this obsidian. They know from the obsidian that they find across these different islands that it comes from a single source, from a single location where they got the obsidian. And then they show, similar to Clovis points, that these obsidian points were cut in a certain way, and that's culture. That's a learned trait. It's not an innate thing that we have. It's not our instincts, but it's taught by others to cut the points in a certain way. Similar ways to how Clovis points are distinct. But you see these different islands, you see how far these obsidian networks go. In this particular case, it's the terminal Pleistocene. It's the end of the Ice Age. But some of these older ones can also be shown. Some of them are based on materials and their chemical mineral composition. But some of them are just shown like, okay, there are human beings here. This island is 50 kilometers, 90 kilometers, 200 kilometers away from the next place. So we know humans at a certain point, and that certain point is 40,000 years ago because this site is dated to 40,000 years ago by the organic material being carbon dated that we find in the context of those human remains. So then they know, that human was here 40,000 years ago, and this is how far away from another island it was. So they know that they traversed over 90 kilometers. 90 kilometers is not 2,000 kilometers, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty far distance. It's beyond the horizon. You can't see the next island at 40 kilometers. Yeah, Ryan, if you could bring that chart back up, we'll look at some of these examples. And it's not like the 800,000 Homo erectus thing. That's, there could be a fluke or something. Somebody might have, a small family group might have fallen on a log and survived a little journey over to this island. It could have happened accidentally, but all of these different sites happening on multiple contexts, that's a better argument. That's not accidental. So what you see here, New Guinea and Australia, you see 60 to 40,000 years ago in different places. These are the oldest sites in the Sahul. People had to get there somehow. They had to cross ocean up to 90 kilometers. That's 60 to 40,000 years ago that they were traveling. No boats. You don't need the boats. The maritime archaeologists don't believe we need the boats. They know that because they crossed these massive distances, that they traveled on boats, even though we don't have the boats. Because unlike Flint Dibble thinks, wood and organic material does decay. It does.
It actually does.
It's not a magic material.
Right.
And also the oceans are not static. They're dynamic. They change.
Right.
Right.
So what would the boats have, would have been currents that were carrying people on like logs that they strung together with primitive rope, or are they actually using the wind to sail, or like what's going on?
So this is a little bit more difficult to ascertain, right? Because we don't have them. We don't have the boats, but what we do have, and I haven't gone too deep into the research in this, but I have seen some research. They have boat building sites. So they have boat building sites, and they have they have the scraping tools that were used to scrape certain materials. And I don't want to speak out of turn, so I don't want to say exactly what it is, but I can say I could send Ryan some of this afterwards. Some of these references where they know that what materials they're using and what kind of what boat they would have been making based on these. If you go microscopic, this actually is what Flint Dibble is an expert in. This archaeobotany stuff, where you look with like a microscope, not a microscope, but something. It might be a microscope actually. This is outside of my understanding, but what I do know is that based on the residue that's on these scraping tools that they find at these boat building sites, they know what type of material they were building, and they can kind of guess what type of boat they were building. So I can't say the specifics just because I don't know, but somebody knows, and they are doing that research. But what we do know a little bit later, after I look at a little bit of these, Bismarck Archipelago in Melanesia, I believe that's where the Polynesians kind of started. They split off from the other Austronesian groups that are related, like the Melanesians, like the Melanesian, Polynesian, and there's another one which I'm gonna kick myself for forgetting. But the third group.
Are we sure that these are like Are we are we sure that these are not Denisovans or Neanderthals that are building at least some of these boats and transporting? Is this all like modern man relative, Homo sapien relatives? Or
for a lot of these sites, we have so Flores. That's Homo erectus at the top there. That's Homo erectus or Homo florensis.
Which is different than us.
It's different than us. Yeah. But these ones, these are Homo sapiens, and they do find remains of Homo sapiens in these places. That's how they know a lot of them. So they're not Denisovans or Neanderthals. That's archaeologists will. I don't care. But archaeologists, I've seen them do it. I've heard them do it. It's pronounced Neanderthal, and they will stick their nose up at you, just up in the air to the point where they're hitting the ceiling. If you say Neanderthal, they will completely discredit you because they can't argue with the information, so they have to mock you. Not you, but people in general. Yeah. Neanderthals and Denisovans, these were Homo sapiens.
It's actually Denisovans.
Thank you.
Yeah.
They would have got me on that.
Yeah.
Denisovans. Yes.
Yeah, because Denisovan cave.
Yeah. Denisovan. I just want to say Denisovan and Neanderthal just to screw
I
with them.
know.
It just makes me want to do it. You look at this: New Guinea, Crete, Melanesia, Sicily, and Italy. On this list, there isn't one, but there is some evidence from Baja, California, from around the terminal Pleistocene, I believe, if I'm remembering right. So it's multiple continents. This was happening.
And none of this should be shocking that human beings like us 50,000 years ago were smart enough to build boats, right?
Anatomically modern from 300,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean they're just as smart as we were. It's like why they're living on coastal areas. Like why wouldn't they want to? I mean hey, this wood floats. Maybe I can move on it. You know, that's not a very hard concept to have. Like that could have been going back. If we're 300,000 years old, and probably more, but that's at least where the modern evidence is taking us to it. That modern man is at least, and woman is at least 300,000 years old. You know, that's it's not shocking to think that we were doing this 250,000 years before this, for sure.
Right. It's certainly possible. It'd be harder to find the evidence, right? Because of these multiple. You go back 300,000 years. That's like before the last ice age that we had, I believe. Might be multiple.
There's probably interglacial periods. I think this ice age it's 2.5 million years old.
Oh, okay. Right. Interglacial is what I was thinking of, not a separate ice age.
But yes, so here we are 50,000 years ago and people are transnavigating oceans.
Yes.
Yeah.
At shorter distances. But And Flynn Dibble's response might be something like, well, they're not traveling across continents, right? They're not traveling across 1,000 miles. I got something for that. I'm prepared. Wait, do you have anything else on this before I
don't think so. I mean, it's just fascinating for people to realize that we were actually doing this that long ago into the distant past. And I mean, of course, you're not going to have the boats. I mean, you're not going to have a tree that fell in a forest from 50,000 years ago, but I mean, to have the scientific proof from the fact that humans are on these continents. I mean, it's pretty crazy. I mean, but at the same time, it makes total sense. It's nothing that we should be surprised about. I guess I just feel like, when something can't be proven, so you can't go back 200,000 years and say that we were doing this, and if something can't be proven, then science is like, didn't happen. And it's like, why not just be open to the possibility of, hey, maybe we were transnavigating the oceans 200,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, and say, just to be able to say we don't know is, I think, a powerful thing to say that people really appreciate and respect. Like, I don't know, but science can't, like archaeologists can't do that. They're like, no, it didn't happen. It wasn't happening, and I know that it wasn't happening. It's like such a limitation and. So it's just like you're just limiting your own thinking into like, okay, I can check this box and I can know that this is truth and I can feel comfortable within this reality by being right, and by checking this box. But in reality, like we don't know what people were doing 250,000 years ago, and it's okay that the experts don't know that. There's no way that they can know that. So just admit we have no idea. Like why are you debating Graham? He's got like. What he's saying has a possibility and a probability of being true, and it's not zero. So
And it's okay to theorize.
and it's okay to, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But you should be careful because it is racist to say that people were traveling on boats 50,000 years ago. We don't want to be racist here.
yeah,
Right.
well, race is an illusion as well. So
Right. It's a spectrum, of course. We as in, European derived people, we sitting here, we were the same people as those Melanesians who ended up on New Guinea and the Australians 50,000 years ago. We come from the same people. I mean, and there's going to be some angry comments. I personally still believe in the out of Africa theory, but I know some people don't. I do myself. I'm willing to look at new evidence, but that is my view. How much time do we have?
We're good, man. I mean,
we are?
Yeah.
Can I hit a couple quick points?
Please,
If we can do some more. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have this more in depth on my channel. I did about a 50-minute video. But this 50-minute video that I did really goes in depth in Flint Dibble's arguments. Some of these other things for maritime archaeology, like the oldest Polynesian canoe that we have is from 600 years ago, about 1400 AD. But the Polynesians, Ryan, if you're still able to pull up that map of Polynesia, they're traveling very far distances, very, very far distances. We don't have that evidence. That one right there, they have the dates on it. 800, I think BC, 700 AD. Look how far they're traveling. They went to Hawaii. That distance, that's like over 1,000 miles. We don't have any boats from that. We don't have any ships. We know what ships they were using. We don't have them. Our oldest one is 600 years ago.
But where are the shipwrecks?
If it didn't happen, no,
it's all deteriorated. It's all gone after just a couple hundred years.
These are dynamic environments. Flint Dibble claimed that the wave action doesn't affect ships. He based that on ceramics, which were found in one place in Florida. The archaeologist who did that work does not believe it. I don't think I'm misrepresenting her when I say she does not believe that's relevant to shipwrecks. Most of this evidence in maritime archaeology is done on shipwrecks. You can find news stories of shipwrecks after a storm coming up on the North Carolina shore. These storms affect them. You have a situation like the Black Sea, one of the most well-preserved shipwrecks ever that was excavated by Krumbochvarov. That's from a few thousand years ago. That Black Sea environment, that is a few thousand years old. The environment is dynamic. It is not static. It changes over time. And when it changes, these conditions, this homeostasis that might preserve a ship for 50,000 years, it's not homeostasis anymore. It's all of it, everything that Flint Dibble, and I will debate with anybody. I've been giving this offer for a long time. I will debate with anybody who wants to defend, anybody who wants to DM me on Twitter, anybody. I will do it live. I will do it for as long as it takes. I will debate any person who wants to defend Flint Dibble's positions on maritime archaeology. I don't care who it is. I will do it. And they are wrong, so they will not do it with me because they know that they're incorrect, so they want to ignore what I'm saying. But I'm not. And I show it with scholarly sources from real maritime archaeologists who sat down and did this work, like John Erlandson, who Flint Dibble cited. John Erlandson's Kelp Highway hypothesis that Flint Dibble cited is not only did John Erlandson do decades of research prior to the Kelp Highway hypothesis, which replaced Clovis first as the idea of the peopling of America, of the Americas, he did that after decades of research into maritime archaeology, literally into research on Pleistocene seafaring. That is what John Erlandson did. This is the one that Flint Dibble cited, one of the foremost maritime archaeologists. Not only did he do that, his work is about Pleistocene seafaring, which Flint Dibble says doesn't exist. The Kelp Highway hypothesis that Flint Dibble cited is a theory of coastal migration during the Ice Age, during the Pleistocene. That is what the Kelp Highway hypothesis is. And I don't think Flint Dibble ever read it. I've read it. But Flint Dibble is saying at the same time that he's citing a theory of Pleistocene seafaring, that Pleistocene seafaring does not exist.
And what was he saying about it?
He was, it was in a separate discussion about the replacement for Clovis first, essentially. It's the heir apparent to Clovis first. And you see this from Europe. This is from the Kelp Highway hypothesis. The Kelp Highway hypothesis does not assume that the only route was from the northwest. Flynn Dibble is the one who cited this by John Erlandson, one of the foremost maritime archaeologists. And in the Kelp Highway hypothesis, it discusses the evidence or the possibility of human beings coming from the northeast and the southwest. And there's more research we can't get into the idea that at a certain point, maybe at 10,000 years ago, at the very least, more recently with Polynesians, that the Polynesians went to South America, or that the South Americans went to Polynesia. Probably the Polynesians went to South America. And there's even some evidence of Australians going to South America. So yeah, I didn't get into NAGPRA, but Dr. Elizabeth Weiss has done great work on NAGPRA. It's changes to this law, which was a good law originally, has kind of destroyed the possibility of museums. And people should care about this, because at this point, it's up to appointed officials and their representatives to decide what is allowed to be displayed by Native American or about Native Americans, including cultural objects. Originally it was just remains and funeral remains and associated grave goods with those remains, but now it applies to all cultural objects, and it also applies to displaying of any cultural items. That was added into this law. And the only perspective that matters is the Native American representatives who come from federally recognized tribes. And it is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is part of the Department of the Interior, that gets to decide who is federally recognized. And it is the Department of the Interior, again, that controls the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is they're a organization under the Department of the Interior. They're the ones who made the changes to NAGPRA. So an appointed official, Deb Haaland, who was the Secretary of the Interior, made these administrative changes to this law that decided that the people in her own organization who decide who the federally recognized tribes are, they get to decide who the representatives are, then that gets to decide who sees anything that's from the ground, from anybody, because it's assumed that they're from Native Americans, before 1492, essentially. That's the short version of it. But Dr. Elizabeth Weiss, she came on my show and talked about more of the specifics of that. And you can see there's more of these maritime arguments. Flynn Dibble's 3 million. He said, "Oh, I made a mistake. It's 300,000." It's not 300,000. Flynn Dibble referenced data that comes up with this 300,000 number that is not relevant.
What was it? 300,000 what? Shipwrecks?
300,000 shipwrecks that exist, that we have in the archaeological record, but that's not true either. Right. It's most of these ships. The data that he referenced was from a bioscience journal, which is okay. You can reference data from other fields, but it has to be relevant. And the data that they referenced he used 4 examples. He even brought this up on Joe Rogan. He showed an image, 4 images. One was the Mediterranean. That was archaeological data, maritime archaeological. The other ones were from NOAA in the United States, Australia, and Ireland. And it was a dead link for NOAA, but that is data that I know is mostly modern shipwrecks, the vast majority modern shipwrecks. It's data that is from where shipwrecks happened. And I know for a fact, because the data is open and I looked through it, that the Irish data from around Ireland, it's also mostly modern. The Australian data, I think it's 41 shipwrecks prior to 1800. These are not shipwrecks that exist in the archaeological record. A lot of them, most of them, especially the older ones, they don't even know where these shipwrecks are. Some of them don't even exist. Some of the notes on some of these shipwrecks that are in there, this is data that's for, and I'm sorry, I'm talking too quickly, but all of this is in my video. If you go to Illegitimate Scholar on YouTube, these ships they annotate where a shipwreck is. Somebody wrote down in 1671 that there was a ship that broke off. One of them literally just says, this ship broke off on the coast. There's no shipwreck. They know that it broke off. They saw it crash. And there is no shipwreck anywhere. A lot of them didn't have coordinates.
So, yeah, I mean, like if you've got a wooden ship and it wrecks into some like whatever reef or something. And like, how often is an ancient ship going to sink and be at the bottom? I mean, the wood floats, right? So if you run into something and it gets all broken up, in a lot of cases, I would think it would just like break apart and float away, and you never see it again, right?
Well, if it breaks up, then of course it's going to go away. But if it sinks, what happens is, yes, the wood would float, but because the ship is full of stuff, that's actually how they usually find them. Because the ship will sink to the bottom because of the cargo in it, which is often ceramics or maybe stones, ballast.
But I guess my question is like, how often does it have enough cargo in it to cause it to sink and then be found at some later date versus, just break up and float away and we never hear about it again? I mean, out of the whatever, if there's been 5 million shipwrecks from now until the earliest point in human history, you would think like at least a boatload of those, maybe half even, would be broken up and just float away, and they never would even get to the point where they're stuck at the bottom of the ocean and they could be found in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be able to give a specific estimate of how many, but even if they do sink, the environment, it's never perfect.
Yeah.
There are a few factors, salt water. This is another thing Flint Dibble did. I'm sorry if we need to stop, but
in a few minutes, but we're good.
Cool.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Flint Dibble said on Joe Rogan, the oldest shipwreck is 7,000 years old. That's not a shipwreck. He was referencing canoes. They were canoes, crucially, and people will respond and say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It's still a shipwreck," or even if it's not a shipwreck, it's still a ship. But it wasn't in the ocean. It was in a lake. And not only was it in a lake, but they were canoes that were in a lake. Excuse me. And I don't know about Rome. I don't know about 7,000 years ago what they did, but what I do know about these dugout canoes, in general, at least in Ireland and for the Algonquins, to store these canoes, you have to keep them waterlogged. They can't dry out. So you can't have them out where they're going to freeze, because if they're waterlogged and it freezes, it's going to destroy it. So they would store these canoes by putting stones in them and putting them below where the ice goes, to store them under the ice line in a lake, which is going to put them in an environment that is perfect for preservation if nobody comes back for them, because they're going to be under the ice line where they're protected because they were put there to be protected. And a factor in which makes the ocean worse for preservation is that there are things like Lemuria, shipworm. There are all sorts of different pests which are worse in warmer water that are going to destroy over time the integrity of a wooden ship or a boat. So a 7,000-year-old canoe in a lake that was very, very likely placed where it was found by somebody who placed it in a place to be protected, rather than a shipwreck, which is up to chance and accidents. That's going to be broken up in salt water, which is not going to preserve.
Not only salt water, but you've got currents and you've got tides and, everything coming in and out. It's like, it's going to be a lot harder to preserve something in the ocean than it is in a lake, I would think, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and Flint Dibble's one good piece of evidence of shipwreck preservation was in the Mediterranean, which is not the ocean. It's a sea.
It's a sea.
It has currents, but they're much, much calmer. And that says nothing about going between continents, especially when Europe at the time was and I will paraphrase or I think quote Graham Hancock, a frozen fucking wasteland. This is not the place that you're going to be going during the Ice Age. There's nothing there. It's frozen. So you'll find perfect environments like in the Black Sea for, I think, the past 6,000 years. That'll change. It's an anaerobic environment. It's cold, low salinity. The Black Sea is, I think, brackish water, so it's not fully salt. Cold, low salinity, low oxygen, and I think those are the three major ones.
So maybe just in case, I mean, I feel like everybody gets it and understands your points in the argument, but maybe, I mean, there might even be people listening that didn't even see the debate between Hancock and Flint. I wonder if you can just kind of summarize, just from a high level, what they were both saying and why you think that Flint just is way off on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Flint Dibble was saying that because there are no ships, and I'm paraphrasing Flint, so if I get this wrong, if that's okay. I'm trying my best from memory, but I'm not trying to misrepresent it. I show quotes from him in my video to attempt to really show what he said. So the video is the best place to go. But if you're not going to do that, that's okay. Flint Dibble is trying to argue that because we have no ships that would have been able to travel across oceans because we don't have them in the archaeological record, that means that disproves Graham's hypothesis. But this is a bad disproof because we know that there was seafaring during the Pleistocene. Also, that ships do not preserve as well as Flint Dibble claimed for a vast number of reasons. Shipwrecks just don't preserve that well. There was seafaring in the Pleistocene, which he said there wasn't. They preserve better. They preserve worse than he claimed. The references that he made to the amount of archaeology that has been done in the oceans were incorrect. He claimed that thousands of ships have been excavated by archaeologists. That's not true. He referenced data that was not archaeological in nature that actually did not show that 300,000 ships exist in the archaeological record. These were vast majority modern ships, which could be considered archaeological, but they do not show, these ships do not show that archaeologists ever found these ships because these are mostly, if you look at the data yourself, which I have, you can look through it. I read them like The Big Short. You go into the things, you read them if you know that reference. But we don't have as many in the archaeological record because there aren't even 300,000 in the archaeological record. They were annotated when they sank. We might not even know where they are. A lot of these coordinates on these databases, where the 300,000 number, the 3 million number of an estimate comes from, they're mostly modern. And if they're not modern, they might not exist in the record. We just know that they sunk. We might even know exactly where they sunk and they're not there when people go looking because they were destroyed. You have to find very specific environments, somewhere like where Vasa sunk off the coast of Sweden, which is a brackish area in, I think, the Black Sea. This is a cold, brackish, low salinity, and I believe it may or may not be. I don't think it's an anaerobic environment, but it might be less oxygenated than elsewhere. They found the ship from the 17th century, best preserved ship that they found in a nearly perfect environment, and it was still heavily destroyed after just 400 years. We also know the Polynesians were traveling across thousands of miles for thousands of years, and yet the oldest ship that we have is from 600 years ago. Flint Dibble was wrong about nearly every single small detail he said about maritime archaeology. He does not understand maritime archaeology, and I will debate anybody who wants to come and discuss this with me because Flint Dibble is wrong, and he will not talk to me because he's scared and he knows that he's wrong, and he would be embarrassed by somebody who only has an undergrad degree in anthropology talking to him and schooling him on what he believes is his own subject. But he is wrong. He was disrespectful to Graham Hancock. He is not a intellectually curious person. He is not willing to think about other possibilities, and he is not the person or the type of person that we are going to learn more about our past from. He's the type of person who is going to only hinder our progress in understanding our past. And anthropology and archaeology, the field, it is a social construct. It is socially constructed by humans. It's culture. It's learned, and it's very new. The field, the father of American anthropology, about 120 years ago, Franz Boas. This is not a long-standing field. This is very new. Their methods are informed by our culture. Their understanding is informed by their selection of how they're selected to be archaeologists and anthropologists. And the idea that they have a monopoly on deciding what our past is wrong. And we're not going to stand for it anymore, especially in an environment like we have today where anybody can put what they want on the internet, and they can, through the power of their argument, not through the power of being in a gate-kept position, of being chosen to be a professor in a university by university presidents. That's just not how it works anymore. And they need to either get with the new understanding of the internet age, or they need to move out of the way because they don't control it anymore.
Good stuff. That's going to be a great clip. Let's take a break for lunch.
Thank you.
Well, that was a powerful closing to the first half. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. And a great first segment in general. So, I figure we close out with maybe, one or two more topics, just kind of see how things flow. What are you working on next? What are the big things coming up for you?
So right now I'm working on another video that's going to be about Margaret Mead and about an older version, an older example of politicization in anthropology. This isn't archaeology. This is Margaret Mead was a cultural anthropologist who was a student of Franz Boas, who was the father of American anthropology. And in the late 1920s, Margaret Mead went to a remote village in Samoa. And when she went there, this was during a big debate within anthropology of nature versus nurture. And this has implications still today. But
nature versus nurture being what?
So yes, the nature versus nurture debate, in my opinion, and I think most people's, there's a little bit of both. But the idea was whether how humans act is based on our nature, as in our biology, as in we act the way we do because of our genetics and our biology and who we are. And different humans that look different will also act different, or even if they look similar, they can still act different if they look similar for some other reason. But people don't change, that they're just the way that they are, which is not true. But it's also not true that it's entirely nurture, which would be that everything is culturally informed. So it's like culture versus innateness. People are the way that they are, and they do the things that they do because of who they are, and that doesn't change. So they're both wrong. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the argument that they were having, but it seems to me that they were essentially arguing one half is saying it's all nature, one half was saying it's all nurture. I'm sure it's more complex than that, but largely that is the way that I've seen it explained. So Franz Boas was on the nurture part of this debate. And like I'd mentioned in the first half of us talking, Franz Boas is the father of American anthropology, and he was ideologically inclined to produce work that worked within that supported his idea of human beings being affected by nurture rather than nature, that human beings were affected by how they learn and their culture rather than them being affected by their biology. And so even in the very first days of the field, it was political, in my opinion, and I think that the evidence supports that. But where this becomes a big issue is that Margaret Mead goes to Samoa for just a few months.
What aspects of the human condition are people saying is are measurable by nature versus nurture?
Yes, that's perfect. This is a great graphic. So nature is the genetics and all the factors that are inherited. So people inherit their traits, and nurture is the variables of the environment, and that would be the cultural. So in this case, and I'll say some other examples, but in this case with Margaret Mead, the discussion was on like humans and are we monogamous? Are we meant? Humans are just innately meant to just have one partner. Are we meant to, or on the nurture side of it, is there culture involved where different people can have different feelings about that, different feelings about what's monogamy, different feelings about, and be taught like violent tendencies of all aspects of life, basically. This particular one is on the other people, other students of Boas, other PhD students, candidates would talk about different aspects of this. But Margaret Mead was specifically sent to study the sexual and the like marriage ideas on Samoa in this place that she was. But it being the 1920s, she went there and she wasn't given access to the whole of society. And she was there for less than a year. I think 4, 6, maybe 8 months less than the village that she was in. And anybody in cultural anthropology knows, and this was during the early days of the idea of ethnography, which is studying other cultures, and of the way that you perform ethnography, which is participant observation, which is observing while participating. And that reminds me of my favorite ethnography, which we can go into after, which is of the Ilahita of New Guinea, and a book called Cassowary's Revenge, which is one of my favorites. But she goes to Samoa. She's there for a few months, and she speaks only to teenage girls. And she does not spend time to incorporate herself into the society in a full way. And she wrote a book called Coming of Age in Samoa based on her experience and what these young girls told her. And what they told her was that there is basically free love on Samoa in this village that she was in. And this was the culture there. And this supports the nurture argument because they were saying that humans are not necessarily monogamous, that we are not by our nature monogamous, and that different environments can have different ways of thinking about love and sexuality and interaction. So what she reported is that all of these young adolescent girls had multiple sexual partners, that there was no amount of jealousy between those sexual partners, that they were very much allowed to, not necessarily encouraged, but not discouraged either at all, to have free love with as many partners as they want. I'm trying to be careful here for your YouTube algorithm, but very, very explicitly and very many partners. And this was what she reported, and she wrote this book, and she published it, and it became widely popular. It became widely popular, and it became the American understanding of Samoa, and it became a piece of this argument that Franz Boas was fighting. And she became very famous. Many people listening to this will have heard of Margaret Mead in the past and of this book. Many of them likely have read it.
This was in the 30s, did you say that it was published?
I think it was published in the 30s, but it was popular into the middle and later 20th century because it became very popular as well in the 1960s. First published in 1928. Yes, and actually I'm also going to talk about Napoleon Chagnon's Yanomamo, which comes later and is also very famous. If you scroll down a little bit, actually, can you? I want to read the foreword by Franz Boas down there. Right, courtesy, modesty, good manners, conformity to define ethical standards are universal, but what constitutes courtesy, modesty, good manners, and define ethical standards is not universal. It is instructive to know that standards differ in the most unexpected ways. And, in general, I actually would agree with that. I would agree with that statement, but in the context, unfortunately, it's not necessarily true. I believe her book became also very popular, maybe a resurgence or maybe newly popular in the 1960s as well. But she was somewhat of a celebrity for most of her life. Margaret Mead was. So the problem is that this was taught in a bunch of anthropology classrooms. And there was a guy named Derek Freeman who did participant observation with the Samoans, and he with the same people. And he studied them, and he came away with a different perspective on their life. And he published a refutation of Margaret Mead's coming of age in Samoa based on his own experience. And there was a documentary from Australia in the 70s or 80s that came out that I've seen several times. I did a live reaction to it on my YouTube, which I think is still up on the YouTube. I sometimes take the lives down, but I'm going to be producing a standalone video on this. And it becomes very important because of what's in that documentary and also what's in Derek Freeman's book, and also, most importantly, what is still talked about today in relation to this book, Coming of Age in Samoa. And this is something I found while doing a little bit of research for this upcoming video, is that there is a public open source textbook that is published by not the SAA, which is the Society for American Archaeologists, but the American Anthropological Association, which is a very large organization. Obviously, this is cultural anthropology. It's not archaeology. So this is an organization that talks broadly about anthropology, which in North America includes archaeology as one of its subfields, as well as cultural anthropology. And in that book, they discuss Margaret Mead's work, and they discuss her work without any of the refutations. And I'll say what the refutations are. In this documentary, they show interviews with actual Samoan people as well as Samoan anthropologists. And like when I say Samoan anthropologists, I mean a Samoan woman who is also an anthropologist by training. So she is ethnically Samoan. She's of their people as well as being a trained anthropologist. And they also interview who we don't know who her research subjects were, the people she spoke to, because their identities would be protected, which is standard for cultural anthropology, and it's for a good reason that they're protected. But there's a woman who claims and is from that village and is of the correct age, who was interviewed for this documentary, who said explicitly that they just lied to Margaret Mead. And that it wasn't true. It wasn't true that they were just going off and having free love with whoever they wanted. And they talk about a Samoan culture of, just making stuff up and trying to get one over on somebody, which I think is something that pretty much everybody does, especially kids, see what you can make somebody believe. I've done it. I've done it a lot. It's fun. It's funny to make up try to get somebody to believe the most ridiculous lie you can. And because Margaret Mead was looking to, and we don't know what the real truth is, but the evidence, and I will show this in the video, seems very obvious to me that that is what actually happened, that this is not the truth. In addition to the research subject, they interview other people who were Samoan, many other people, including who at the time, contemporaneously to when the documentary was produced, the current governor of American Samoa, who happened to have been in the village at the time and met Margaret Mead when he was much younger, he said that it wasn't true. And you could argue that they're just trying to save face. The Samoan anthropologist said that it was all lies. And the Samoan anthropologist says something in the documentary, which to me, what the Samoan anthropologist said, I have to be careful with my words here again for the YouTube algorithm, but
I don't care about the algorithm.
Great. She basically calls her a slut, is what she says. The Samoan anthropologist, if you read between the lines, she says, when she wrote that stuff about us, and she seemed hurt by what Margaret Mead had written and by how her people had been portrayed. She seemed hurt by it, and I can see why. But what she said is that I think that she was just talking about herself, which, I read as she's just kind of saying that she was being a slut and that she pushed that on the other people. But
so she's made it up?
Well, it's not that Margaret Mead made it up. It's that she was asking leading questions toward that. Recreational lying is moreover, recreational lying is a widespread practice in Samoa, Freeman reports. Yes. So there are many, many interviews. There was even a Samoan guy that was in an anthropology classroom, and an anthropology professor was talking about coming of age in Samoa. And he stood up in the class and said, "Hey, I'm from that village, and none of this is true. Like, this isn't true. This isn't what it's like." Which Mead admits that she made no systematic investigation of Samoan sexual behavior. It's not, 6 months is not enough time. 8 months is not enough time. Participant observation, true ethnography, it takes years to understand the culture. Derek Freeman spent years before he was, you're supposed to study every aspect of the society, and it takes years to gain the trust and people to become accustomed to you to where you're not an oddity anymore. This is very common in ethnographies. I recently read a great ethnography called A Death in the Rainforest, which is about the loss of a language in a village in New Guinea over a few decades. Participant observation, very standard. It takes years. It does not happen in 8 months. You don't get the truth there. You might get snippets, but you do not get an understanding of the people. But in this textbook that is open source from the American Anthropological Association, which I believe is the largest anthropology association in the United States, whereas the SAA is the largest archaeological, they discuss Margaret Mead's findings. They don't mention Derek Freeman or his refutation, and they present it as just truth in this textbook. You can find this. It's open source from the American Anthropological Association, I think in chapter 2. And they talk about Margaret Mead and her idea and what it meant to the argument, but they don't mention Derek Freeman. They don't talk about what the Samoan people themselves said publicly in that documentary. They don't mention the documentary. They say nothing of it. Do you have any questions before I?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. No, I think I get it. It's just, it's like, yeah, it's just a great example of how one person's word kind of becomes the truth.
Yeah. And when people want to believe that, it fits, it's in line with their own beliefs. And certain people will push what's in line with their own beliefs and push down something that contradicts those beliefs, which is what you would hope would not be in a textbook.
And it's an easy thing to just want to talk about in order to gain moral superiority, in order to judge people as, being promiscuous or whatever. It's something that you could see how it would catch fire and catch on in public circles and that people would want to, discuss this in order to elevate their false sense of self.
I think while a lot of the Samoans took it negatively because a lot of them are quite conservative, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but certainly many of them, at least the ones interviewed in the documentary, viewed it as negative. But I think the people pushing it were viewing it as more of a positive thing, as a countercultural thing, being against the monogamy and our own what they might have viewed as sexual repression that we have in our own culture.
In the 30s. Okay.
And later. Yeah. This was a book that stayed popular. It's actually, it's still popular.
Well, that's probably the discussion. You're taking one side or the other on that debate. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm more on the Samoan side. I'm on the Samoan side, both with what is good behavior. And also I believe that they have been mistreated. Although the people who push this idea don't view it negatively, it still paints the Samoans in a way that it seems to me, I don't want to speak for them, but it seems to me that is not their perception of themselves, and it's not true. There were no pregnancies, there were no STDs for the entire time they're there. So if these people without access to contraception, if they're having, just monumental amounts, they're going out every week and having relations with new partners every week. All these different girls are doing that with the men in the village, the boys in the village. You're going to see STDs. You're going to see pregnancies. And if you don't, I don't understand that doesn't make any sense. So it's impossible to know 100% because it was 100 years ago, but I am 99% convinced that Derek Freeman is correct in what he says, and he spent more time there, and the people themselves say that. And you can say maybe they just were protecting their own image because they do view it negatively, and maybe they did, but all the evidence points toward Derek Freeman being more correct. And even if that's not true, he still has a solid refutation, and it should be included in a textbook that discusses this. And moreover, in literally the next section of that chapter, of that open source textbook, they discussed Napoleon Chagnon, who is an American anthropologist who went to do ethnographic work on the Yanomamo, who are a people of the Amazon. And I've read some of his stuff. He is a controversial anthropologist. In fact, I think it was the New York Times that when he passed away a few years ago, and it wasn't an obituary, but when they reported on his death, in the headline, they described him as Napoleon Chagnon, controversial anthropologist, dies at this age, which I found very disrespectful to describe somebody as controversial when reporting on their death. That's just extraordinarily distasteful to me and shows the amount of vitriol against these people. But in the next section of this same textbook, while they completely ignored any refutation, no matter how valid, no matter the mountain of evidence against it, and the pretty much universal understanding within cultural anthropology that true ethnographic work takes years, not months, not less than a year, never. This is completely non-standard. No refutation. They discussed Napoleon Chagnon's work only to include mainly refutations of Napoleon Chagnon's work, and to include almost some of these refutations. I haven't looked. I have to, for this video, look into the detail of these refutations, but I know that some of the attacks against Chagnon, that he did horrible things like inciting violence between groups of people. These accusations, which the textbook brings up, these are accusations with no evidence. These are accusations that are just somebody said them. They said that this happened, but there's no evidence behind him doing this. Maybe there is evidence of some of the others, but I know that certain of the accusations that are printed in that textbook do not have evidence that supports them. So this is a very politicized field. It always has been since the very beginning.
Drama. Yeah. Okay, so then in terms of the biggest mysteries that you see within anthropology today, what do you look back on and it just still puzzles people today?
Got it. Okay. So one of the biggest mysteries, and one that I'm interested in, that I became aware of recently, is the haplogroup X and its appearance in North America as well as in Caucasian areas, as in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. In the haplogroups, we have two haplogroups for people. We have the haplogroup that passes in our DNA from our paternal line and from our maternal line. So it's Y DNA for the male side. Everybody has one of these. And then from the female side, you get your mtDNA haplogroup. So from your mother and your father, you inherit from your mother your mtDNA haplogroup. You inherit from your father your Y DNA haplogroup. And if you've ever, you or anyone else, if you've ever done a 23andMe or an Ancestry DNA test, they'll tell you what they are. For me, my male Y DNA haplogroup is R2B. R2B. Why am I forgetting this right now? It's the one. 80% of Irish people have this same, and it's very common in Western Europe. So it's like literally 80%. Whereas the mtDNA, the female haplogroups, because it's from the female, not the male line, and just by how women give birth, and men are more able, like Genghis Khan, of course, is able to father so many children. There's more of there's a larger distribution of the mtDNA from for your haplogroup, the mtDNA haplogroup, which is from your maternal line. There's more of them. So this X haplogroup, this comes from one single female ancestor a long time ago, like 10, 15,000 years ago. And they sometimes mutate like any other gene, right? So there are smaller distinctions within the haplogroups, these subclades, but they're all the X's. Ryan, if you want to bring up like different haplogroups, just like lists of haplogroups, it might show it a little differently. It's haplo, HAPLO, and we can pull up a map of haplogroups. Here we go. Haplogroups. Actually, we can just read that AI thing if I'm not explaining it very well. This is a complex topic. Haplogroups are genetic classifications based on inherited markers, primarily from mitochondrial DNA. That's the mtDNA for maternal lineages, and the Y chromosomes for paternal lineages. They help trace human ancestry and migration patterns. So if you want to click on that map there. So these are Y haplogroups that go through the male line. So I'm sorry, not R2b, R1b. So you see like the majority, it's even more so. It's like 80, 75% in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales are R2b and or R1b, and there are a few others. And then you see I, and then there might be I1, I2, and these are different haplogroups from the male line. So you know from the Y DNA that there was one single guy that started this haplogroup a long time ago, which means that if you go far enough back, the majority of people in France, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Cornwall, Iceland, Spain, France, you go back to when R1b started, the majority of us have one single male ancestor who created that line. And then, so this is Y DNA. So this is for the male line. If you go to the female line, it's the MT DNA. So if we could bring up the X haplogroup map again. So this is a mystery. So what this implies here is that in North America, through the female line, there are people that share a maternal ancestor back before at least 9,000 years ago that exist in both the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and North Africa, but not, I'm sorry, I said Asia, Middle East as in Western Asia, but not East Asia, not Japan, not any of those places in between. So there is a maternal, and the Mormons, we'll discuss this, no hate to the Mormons. The Mormons love to discuss this X haplogroup, but they don't, but it destroys the Mormon side of this argument. It's in line with their understanding of history, but it destroys the argument because Kennewick Man, who was a famous case in anthropology, Kennewick Man has the X2A haplogroup. He's of the X haplogroup. And Kennewick Man was found from 9,000 years ago in the Pacific Northwest. And the distribution of this X haplogroup implies, because it's in the Northeast, unless somehow they did travel east over the Bering Strait, because it doesn't show up in Asia, it doesn't show up in what's now Russia, it doesn't show up in any of those places, and it doesn't show up in what's now Alaska in the northeast of Canada, but it shows up over there, and the distribution spreads out from what's now Newfoundland in northeastern Canada. It implies, it's very, very likely, it doesn't have to be the case. It could be that the haplogroup was just wiped out in East Asia and in the northwest of North America, but it implies that there was at least more than 9,000 years ago, because Kennewick Man has this haplogroup. They've been there at least 9,000 years. It implies that there was a northwestern migration from Europe into the Americas. So this is a mystery. But there's no boats, so it must not have happened. Must be magic.
Right.
Yeah.
They could have swam, I guess.
Yeah. You could have swam 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or were they not good swimmers either back then?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe. They must have. Let's ask Flynn Dibble. Yeah. He knows.
Well, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So this is a big mystery.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one for sure.
And this is one that they don't have answers for. And there's other of these genetic anomalies. Like, Ryan, if you could look up the Australian and or Polynesian DNA in South America.
Yeah, that's a big one that I'm familiar with that, but would love to talk about it.
Yeah, I've gone into a little bit of detail on this in some threads on my... there's evidence of genetic links between some indigenous populations in South America and indigenous Australians, specifically in the Amazon region and along the South American Pacific coast. So South American Pacific coast is obviously pointing towards Australia, thousands of miles away.
Right.
The map that they're showing with that AI overview, again, with the same thing as the X haplogroup.
Yeah.
If that's the case, if they did go over the Bering Strait and then south, it would imply that the Australians, the Aboriginal Australians, moved through Southeast Asia, East Asia, Northeast Asia, Alaska, all of North America, They moved through there, left no trace of their DNA, and then happened to show up on the west coast of South America and the Amazon, which does not make it makes less sense than.
But they had to have, because they couldn't sail east.
Well, we don't have boats, so obviously.
I mean, all they have to do is sail east. Like it's like, you know, like they know
direct.
which way. Just follow the sun. Like they're just like, literally all they have to do is go directly to the east, and they run into the west coast of South America. And humans are making this so impossibly difficult today, just because we're saying that they didn't have the ability to sail the ocean. Is that right? I mean, that's why they're putting these that's why they're taking us all the way up through this land, through frozen tundra up there. I mean, through the Bering Straits, and then through, you know, through, I mean,
and then down all the way down.
It's the most, and there's no evidence, there's no DNA evidence that they settled in any of these places, or that they stopped, or that they were ever even there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the craziest thing you've
It doesn't
ever
make
seen.
any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
It is possible. It's 100% possible.
Sure.
But if you use Occam's razor, you know, what's more likely, that they happened to go through all these places, left no trace, or all of their descendants were killed in every other place along thousands of miles in Northeast Asia, China.
Right.
They were all killed.
Yeah.
None of them survived, not a single one.
It's the craziest thing.
It doesn't make any sense.
But during the Ice Age, sea levels would have been 400 feet and lower, right? So I mean, transnavigating the ocean at that point, I'm assuming there's more little islands. Is there? Or is that? I know that strip of islands that I thought could have been helped to be used, that strip of land that's under was probably not above water. Although, these might have been. It would have been somewhat easier. It still would have been extraordinarily difficult. Yeah.
But we know, because of the Polynesians and how far the Polynesians went. Remember, the Polynesians, the oldest example we have is 600 years ago. But we know that for thousands of years, the Polynesians were traveling on boats that we have. They're called wakas, these outrigger canoes.
Yeah.
Relatively simple boats. The oldest one is 600 years, but we know for thousands of years they were going across the Pacific, across thousands of miles. Right here. We know this was happening. The Micronesians, they come out from in Melanesia there, the Solomon Islands or the Bismarcks is where they're essentially rooted. But right there, Easter Island, I generally prefer to use either both names or the indigenous name, which is Rapa Nui. That happened, but it doesn't explain the Australian DNA. It definitely doesn't explain that. But I believe there's also evidence of Polynesian DNA in South America. But that makes more sense. That's much more believable for mainstream anthropology. And there are some recent papers which discuss, and I'm not even going to attempt to go into the detail of this. I wrote a thread on a discovery of it goes back into the archaeobotany of some sites on Rapa Nui that were dated to be like hundreds of years old, that had evidence pre-European contact on these sites of plants that very likely plants that came from South America, which shows that they had access to South America prior to European contact.
Right.
That's the difficult part about this, is because you have to date it just like the canoe I was discussing to not be influenced by European technology. With those plants, if the date of the site is after European contact, then you can't rule out that Europeans brought it there. But if the site is dated before that and you have plants from South America, then it proves that those plants had to have come from South America through either South American or more likely Polynesian, because we know they had that technology, Polynesian seafarers.
But what if this is way older? Like what if the DNA comes from 20,000 years ago? Like, isn't that possible that we're seeing the DNA in South America and it got here during the last ice age? Like, I mean, and that the plants that you're talking about aren't like 2,000 years old getting over there, 3,000 years old. Like that map is showing 1,000 BC. Ryan, pull up the iPad. Because like, wouldn't this would have all been above water, right? I mean, this would have been a continent here. So you're not just talking about little islands out in the middle of nowhere. You're talking about a population, like a global population of humans that existed in this part of the world. Like, how hard is it to send a group of people and say, "Hey, sail east"? You know, just go that way. Sail. I mean, of course you would get their DNA. Is that crazy? Like, or
there's different markers to know, right? Like with the subclade of the mtDNA haplogroup, with the more specific distinction of the haplogroup, we know that is an X2A mtDNA. So we know that it's not more recent immigration because that distinction happened a long time ago. So I've looked at the specifics of Kennewick Man, of X2A. I have not looked at the specifics of the Australian DNA there, but there might be information in there that tells us one way or the other.
ChatGPT it, Ryan. What's the question? How far back does Australia DNA into South America go? Is that kind of the question?
It might give you an answer. I'm not sure. It's just it would be the level of like distinction that their haplogroups have that would show. The genetic signal is distinct from the main ancestry. The Australasian link appears to date back to at least 10 to 15,000 years ago.
At least 10 to 15,000 years, right. So
because
that...
my answer wouldn't be distinct. Like the subclade would show a range almost of how distinct it is. It's not going to show you an exact year. May have, yeah.
Possibly 15 to 30,000 years, right. So, I mean, this isn't that hard to figure out. Like,
yeah. Yeah. It's certainly not disproven.
Right.
I'll tell you that.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, the genetic stuff is, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at it and trying to understand it or dissect it or anything, but I know that it exists, and it makes total sense that you've got a population, you've got a globe spanning population, and they weren't stupid. They knew how to sail. Right. Of course, we're not going to have the boats. We're not going to have the wood from 20,000 years ago, but it makes sense that the DNA is where it is.
Dr. Elizabeth Weiss is a forensic anthropologist. She's a biological anthropologist. She works more on bones, I think, but she would probably know better for some of this stuff. And I also have there's a smaller creator I know, another woman who I can give her information to Ryan. And she's pretty new, but from what I've seen, what she said, our conversations, she's pretty fantastic. And I might be able to get her to answer some specific questions that you have. And I'll put you in contact.
All right. Sweet. Okay.
But that's the extent of what I know on this.
Okay.
That was stretching the very last of my brain cells
to
talk about this.
Yeah. Understood. No, and thank you for getting into it. But no, it's been a great conversation. I've learned a lot. Appreciate you making the trip down. And yeah, I mean, it's some good stuff covered, especially the maritime archaeology. I think is fascinating. So thank you.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a great time.
For sure. Yeah. Anything else on your mind that you want to close out with, or you feeling good?
Flint Dibble's wrong.
Perfect.
Talk to me live, Flint. You won't do it.
We'll close out there, man. Good to meet you. Good to have you in town.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
Yep. Good times. Thank you, Ryan.